Hello to all our esteemed English-speaking auditory. My name is Vasyl Pekhno. I'm a Ukrainian journalist who is working from the very beginning of Ukrainian war with maps, reviewing them. And right now, today, as of July the 25th, I propose to all of you to watch this fresh update on Ukrainian battle map situation. So please join, like our video, actually subscribe to this YouTube channel where you watch it, and don't forget to leave your comments below the video. Let's begin with Zaporizhzhia region, where some actually offensive actions from the occupiers. So let's start with that, and I'll explain everything what was on Ukrainian battle lines during the week. During this week, actually. So let's begin.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
This is the Zaporizhzhia region, and it is likely to cause the most concern, perhaps even anxiety, especially among our audience, because on the latest maps, in some of the most recent changes on the deep state map, there have been Russian advances toward the settlement of Plavny and Russian advances in Kamyansk. And this creates a certain impression, a certain picture that threatening circumstances are emerging here. I mentioned earlier that indeed at the operational level, there are threatening circumstances here that could arise if the Russians reach the settlement of Stepnohirsk, and especially if they take the heights to the west of Stepnohirsk. As of today, this has not happened yet, although it is reported that the Russians are approaching Stepnohirsk. In particular, the day before yesterday, it was reported that 6 Russians made it to Stepnohirsk, but it was a one-way trip for them and they were simply eliminated there. Accordingly, there really are threats here. Yes, I'll repeat once more, from the heights to the west of Stepnohirsk, the enemy will gradually be able to reach Zaporizhzhia. Such a scenario is possible. I can't say that it is highly likely. At the same time, I can't say that it is impossible, but well, let's put it this way. It won't come easily or cheaply for the Russians because they need to take those heights first. And only from there will they be able to reach those coveted 20 kilometers, which would allow them to use their FPV drones to reach only the southern outskirts of Zaporizhzhia. That would be little consolation, so to speak, if they, at least in principle, have the ability to reach Zaporizhzhia. But now, friends, I want to explain to you purely based on facts in the simplest terms, showing a map of the elevations that this path of theirs to Stepnohirsk. To Stepnohirsk, the Russians are undoubtedly advancing, and to the west of Stepnohirsk, they will also continue to move. But this path of theirs, whether along the roads or across the fields, will be extremely difficult. Neither this way nor that way will be an easy route for the enemy. Why is that? To understand this, we need to look at the topographic elevation map onto which I have marked the current line of contact. Here in red, you can see the area where the enemy has advanced. And what do we actually see? That, in fact, the enemy, first of all, has not yet captured Kamyansk. In any case, the settlement of Kamyansk has not been taken. This was reported yesterday by deep state analysts who wrote and asserted that fighting is currently ongoing in Kamyansk. Well, as you can see, only half of the village is occupied by the enemy. Fighting continues in the rest, and the Russians are trying to finish clearing it to establish full control over the village. But the defense forces are trying to prevent this scenario by inflicting as many strikes as possible, both with FPV drones and with airdropped munitions, because here our positions are precisely on the high ground. Now, let's return to the topographic elevation map. And here, these hills are significant elevations that are controlled specifically by our troops. So here they are, these hills. You can see where Kamyansk is. It is actually right on the front line, divided by this red line. And it's bad that the occupiers crossed the Yanchikrak River and reached Kamyansk. The good thing is that ahead of them lies an uphill climb, then descent to Stepnohirsk, and then another climb up to take the heights north and northwest of Stepnohirsk. Accordingly, this route, in principle, cannot be easy. I specifically showed this map to factually convince you, friends, without lying, of what the real situation is here. So now the occupiers will have to climb up with their infantry, then descend, and then climb up again. This is a scenario that, to put it mildly, will cost them dearly in blood. And accordingly, there's no need to panic prematurely and shout that all of Zaporizhzhia is already within range of enemy drones or, God forbid, enemy artillery, because objectively, that is not the case. Multiple launch rocket systems, one way or another, have already been able to reach Zaporizhzhia, and this has been the case for quite some time. This is not something new. So, unfortunately, there are certain challenges, but overall, there's no reason to expect a rapidly deteriorating scenario here. Although, in reality, the intensity of enemy activity in Zaporizhzhia is currently increasing. I'll even show you a series of photos right now. These photographs were taken by our people in the occupied territories. They were published by the Center for the Study of Occupation and its head, Petro Andriushchenko, who showed significant movement of Russian trucks that have recently begun to actively move in the Berdyansk and Mariupol areas. According to Andriushchenko, these trucks are mainly moving in two directions. One of them is towards Polokhy in the Zaporizhzhia region, the Polokhy direction. So here are Polokhy, here they are, and these trucks are moving in this direction. The second is to the north of Donbas, north towards Donbas, that is towards the Novopavlivka and Pokrovsk direction. Also, some are moving towards Polokhy from Mariupol and from Berdyansk. This is where the Russians are bringing in equipment. Here in the Zaporizhzhia region, in this area, the Russians are mainly bringing in tanks and air defense systems. To Donbas, they are mainly bringing people, a large number. Regarding the movement to Donbas, Andriushchenko reports that such large convoys to Donetsk region haven't been seen for a long time. Over the course of a few days, we're talking about hundreds of trucks of various purposes. As for the movement toward the Polokhy direction, such a large amount of armored vehicles being transferred there hasn't been seen in a long time. Besides armored vehicles and tanks, I would also mention air defense systems. So why are the Russians, let's first deal with Zaporizhzhia and then we'll move on to Donbas. Why might the Russians be moving equipment there? Because in the near future, besides this area where they might have certain tactical prospects, they want to launch attacks on Orikhiv. And moreover, to carry out these attacks from three directions. Specifically, this means the villages of Novoandrivka, Novodanilivka, and Mala Tokmachka. By the way, it was the soldiers of the 118th Mechanized Brigade who showed footage of repelling one of the recent attacks in the direction of Mala Tokmachka. Here are these videos, by the way, already showing the use of tanks. By the way, it's remarkable that there haven't been any mechanized assaults for quite some time, but just recently the Russians carried out such an assault in the Zaporizhzhia direction. As a result, they lost one tank, 3 BMPs, 4 buggies, 38 occupiers killed, and 3 occupiers wounded. I even read on one of the public forums a comment saying, it feels like the generals from near Kurakhove, who were in charge of the Kurakhove operation, were suddenly transferred to the Zaporizhzhia direction. And so he decided, waking up with a hangover, to launch a mechanized attack in the hope that it might actually happen. It didn't happen, but it's quite likely that soon we'll see a few more such attacks, both from the Robotyne area towards Novodanilivka and towards Mala Tokmachka and Novoandrivka. This is what the Russians might be preparing for. Recently, there's been a bit more danger emerging around Huliaipol. That's also the Zaporizhzhia front. Here's Huliaipol, but the threat isn't coming from frontal attacks. Rather, it's more of a rear area danger that's appearing. Because right now, the Russians are advancing rapidly in the Novopavlivka direction, particularly in its southernmost area. This is the area around the settlement of Zelempol. Here you can see Novopil and Zelimpol. There's a river here, a river called the Vorona. By the way, yesterday I discussed it with the analyst and commentator, military political expert of the Information Resistance Group, Alexander Kovalenko, and he specifically emphasizes this point, that if the Russians cross Zelempol, if they take Timirivka, the next settlement already in Zaporizhzhia, then it is quite likely that, that a rear threat will actually emerge for the Huliaipol direction, coming precisely from this area of Donbas. That is why it is quite possible that the Russians will now reinforce the Novopavlivka direction here by moving about 100 trucks, as reported by our resistance in the occupied territories, in order to strengthen the troops that are already present here. Overall, in the Novopavlivka direction, according to the data operated by the Information Resistance Group, the Russians have quite a significant resource in this area, about 100,000 personnel. 100,000, we don't have anything close to that concentration of troops there. That's exactly why unfortunately, we are seeing these most concerning advances happening specifically in the Novopavlivka direction. Plus, now there are already threats emerging to the rear of the Huliaipol direction. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians have a slightly larger force, 110,000, but it's quite clear that Ukrainian troops also have a greater presence here than in Novopavlivka. That's why the situation in the Pokrovsk direction is a bit easier, so to speak. Moreover, as I mentioned just yesterday, certain actions have been taken here, which I am convinced will help improve and stabilize the situation. However, these actions cannot be publicly disclosed. But trust me, just take my word for it, friends, that right now in the area of Myrnograd and Pokrovsk, there are certain elements, there will be certain elements of improvement. Well, at the very least, this improvement is evident against the backdrop of Russian propagandists who have now started making videos, spreading lies about breakthroughs toward Pokrovsk. And this is actually evidence of certain weakness on the part of the Russians. Right now, they're posting these first-person videos. You see, with captions like "The Joy of Liberation," the Russian army has begun clearing the outskirts of Pokrovsk with Krasnoarmeysk crossed out. This is a first-person video. Really, Deep State described this situation very well. They say it's Mosfilm clearing Pokrovsk, or Mosfilm has started the assault on Pokrovsk. The thing is, these kinds of videos from action cameras, where groups calmly walk through almost intact private houses in Pokrovsk and liberate the residents of Donbass, are completely fake. This is a fake video because, well, first of all, there simply aren't any intact houses like that left in Pokrovsk. Secondly, no one would let the Russians move around so freely in Pokrovsk because right now it's a complete kill zone filled with both our and enemy FPV drones. And thirdly, well, there is no enemy. You know, there simply isn't an enemy like that there in Pokrovsk. This is complete nonsense. This is a film made up by the Russians and they're shooting it for propaganda purposes. And if they start lying, that means things are actually going pretty well. It means that our troops in the city itself have cleared out the vast majority of those sabotage groups that tried to break through here. Because as even the Deep State guys write, these sabotage groups that came in here through Virov and Persha Travnia towards Pokrovsk, to the southwestern outskirts of Pokrovsk, they were trying so hard to run away that they even dressed up as civilians to pretend they were local residents, not Russian occupiers, not Russian assault troops. In fact, several of them were discovered and, well, their lies were exposed and they were punished. That's what I would say. The vast majority of those who broke through there, most of them are already KIA. Maybe a few individual occupiers are still trying to survive somewhere there. But that's definitely a staged film. There's nothing even close to occupiers freely strolling around Pokrovsk. So, friends, if you see such footage, if you see such reports, that's fake information, don't believe it. But what is absolutely not fake is that in our northern district, north of Pokrovsk, the situation is undoubtedly getting worse and worse. Now, even non-fake videos from the Russians have started to appear, showing that in Novoekonomichne, they are more actively unfurling their rags, filming their presence, and specifically declaring themselves in this village, in this settlement, which essentially serves as the gateway before Minohrad, and Minohrad in turn is the gateway before Pokrovsk. Therefore, unfortunately, there is a general deterioration of the situation here in the Pokrovsk direction. But, by the way, still in the propagandist mode, we shouldn't forget that yesterday there was such an unusual event, which so far doesn't have exact confirmation, but at least in this review, we can be glad about. There is a well-known Russian war correspondent, the so-called Filatov. Rumor has it that he went to Pokrovsk to shoot his propaganda videos. Maybe he was convinced by the claims that the Russian army was already in Pokrovsk. So he went there to Pokrovsk and, as they say, caught an FPV drone from the Magyar birds right in the face. There are no reports on the current whereabouts of this war correspondent Filatov. He hasn't made contact. But as many Russians are writing, like Bad Nushi might have Kobzonyusha died. But there are also other theories that he staged his own supposed abduction, his capture, in order to later spin some kind of heroic, fantastical story to draw public attention among Russians to his rather unruly persona. Like now near Pokrovsk, he can claim that he escaped, ran away from the cockles. I don't know what his fate is. I hope it's a minus, that they've taken him out. Here you can see in the background, this video is from, well, these are the shots that were available. And you can see a drone flying in the back. Supposedly, it was the Magyar birds who took him out. And in fact, this is an important story because enemy so-called opinion leaders, agitators, various recruiters, various organizers, these even higher priority targets, more important than enemy soldiers or ordinary terrorists. because they are the ones causing things right now. First of all, they are fighters on the so-called hybrid propaganda front. This is also a very important role, and the Russians, it's worth noting, to give them their due, have elevated this component of their offensive, their operations, to a very high level. These are precisely such asymmetric influence. And these propagandists, they are the warriors of these influences. Secondly, they play a very important role in influencing the unfortified Russian population, which continues to go off, die, fight, and so on. That is why, without a doubt, they are among the priority targets for elimination. But overall, it can and should be said, and it is true about the films and cartoons that the Russians are making in Pokrovsk. However, the situation further north, unfortunately, tends to be getting worse. But not everything is so bad. I will still finish today's weekly summary with some positive news. I will tell you that it is now official that we can talk about the liberation of the settlement of Kondrativka, although this is in the Sumy region. Although in reality, its liberation actually happened earlier, but Deep State only yesterday evening, already at night, actually provided information that Kondrativka was liberated by the fighters of the 225th Assault Regiment, and that the liberation took more than one day because quite a few, let's say, Russians had entrenched themselves there and tried to hold on. They were even in a certain encirclement. In particular, we're talking about Russians from the 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment, about whose encirclement, by the way, I reported here. In addition, the 225th reported on the overall outcome of this operation to liberate Kondrativka. With just one regiment, they managed to take out 3 Russian battalions and 1 Russian battalion commander. Specifically, these were battalions from the 40th Marine Brigade, the 155th Marine Brigade, and the battalion from the 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment, which was the one that got encircled here. And it was the battalion commander of this 30th Motorized Rifle Regiment who was eliminated there while being surrounded. Why did this happen? Why is the 225th so successful and honestly so impressive? By the way, they were among those who liberated Andriy. This is already the second settlement in Sumy region that has essentially been liberated by them. Deep State provides an explanation for this. First of all, I quote, "This success became possible thanks to the unique tactics and approaches used by the 225th Separate Assault Regiment." Once again, the unit has demonstrated that we have those who are capable of carrying out effective offensive operations. These are the very people whom, in particular, Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi mentioned this week again in his summary. I'll say that Syrskyi was talking specifically about them saying that there are motivated and highly trained fighters who are capable of conducting assaults, provided that we receive equipment supplies, provided that this equipment supply is ensured by the United States, because no one else in the world except them can do this at the moment. That's why this week we finally had the first purchase of weapons from the United States. There may be some progress in this regard, but to be objective, let's be honest, at the moment we are not even close to counting on any offensive. But as Trump says, you can't win a war on defense alone. Is probably right about that, but at the moment that's a completely unrealistic imaginary scenario. If this scenario exists in the mind of our commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrskyi, then it must be well thought out. And Syrskyi is in fact a well-known strategist. No matter what anyone says about him, no matter what he's called or how dismissively some Ukrainians may treat him, Syrskyi is in many ways truly a general who knows how to play the strategy. And if he does have something in mind, well, God willing, he'll be able to make it happen. And God willing, it will come at minimal cost to us, with maximum losses for the Russians and with the greatest possible return of our territory. However, for now, I personally can't even begin to imagine that. Well, friends, thank you for your attention. Take care of yourselves. All the best. And until we meet again, stay strong. We'll talk again next week.